You good to go, Jeff?
Yeah, good to go. Briefcase out of the way.
Are you ready to make a start, everyone?
It's really nice meeting you.
You have been waiting an hour and 22 minutes. And I think the last half an hour, tweets have been flying around to say Jeff Stelling is in the building. I'm really pleased to welcome everyone to what's our 5th annual Journalism Week. It's probably the second most important thing after your placement because it brings industry people out of their daily jobs and here to Leeds Trinity to tell you about what's going on in the industry and to give you an insight about how you make a start in your career. I'm going to hand over now to our TV tutor, Mike Best, who's going to introduce Jeff. But great start to the week. Really glad to see you all here. Hand over to Mike.
Thanks, Catherine. What a great start to Journalism Week to have Jeff with us. I had the pleasure of working with Jeff first in the 1980s when we were both at Radio Tees and Jeff was sports editor. Since then he's become one of the most respected and trusted sports journalists in the country. For 5 successive years he's been named Sports Broadcaster of the Year by the Sports Journalists Association, and there's no greater accolade than that given by your peers, so that's an incredible achievement. His job's taken him all over the world to see some of the most incredible sports events and to see some of the most beautiful sights in the world, not least Rachel Riley from the Countdown Studios. And he gets paid for it. Jeff Stelling.
That's right. I should say, sports editor at Radio Tees with a staff of none. Okay. Well, it's a fantastic turnout. Thanks for coming, first of all. Thanks for asking me here today as well. Those of you who don't maybe know quite what I do, I present a show called Gillette Soccer Saturday, principally, which is a football show with no football. You know, you don't see any goals, you don't see any shots, don't see any near misses. So it's very much like watching Leeds United, I suppose, in that sense. And we have a panel of experts telling you what you miss. And you know, I've been lucky enough over the years to work with some of my great heroes. George Best, who I know precedes all your time, but was the greatest footballer that I ever saw. He wasn't really the greatest pundit in the world in the sense that his reliability didn't match his ability. So we were the first football show actually to have a substitute because we were never sure whether George would turn up. In fact, some days we were sure he wouldn't turn up. I remember one day seeing a story on the front page of the Daily Mail on a Saturday morning, and the gist of that story was that George had spent the night on the town in London. He'd gone back to his hotel room with a couple of ladies of the night, shall we say. And while he was sleeping, they stole £2,000 from him. So he didn't show that day, and I said, George can't be with us today, he's not feeling too grand. And and he wasn't. George used to sit next to Rodney Marsh, who was, you know, I mean, Rodney was the spikiest character you've ever seen, really. I was often asked why people took an instant dislike to him, and I used to tell them it saved time. He's the sort of guy who invented one-upmanship. You know, if you've been at Tenerife, he's been to 11 Tenerife, that sort of thing. But there were people like Frank McClintock and David Ginola, and nowadays, of course, we've got the former Liverpool captain, lifted the European Cup, Phil Thompson, Matt Le Tissier, made more than 1,000 appearances, all at Kentucky Fried Chicken, unfortunately. You know, my sporting heroes, and you know, I'm a council houseboy from Hartlepool, and sometimes ask myself how it all happened. So this basically is my story and the lessons I've learned along the way, and at the end of it, you know, hopefully if you've got any questions, just fire away. I mean, you've obviously all decided you want to be journalists, and that's fantastic. I've loved every minute of it. I always wanted to be a journalist. It was my only ambition at school. And people will come along and they'll tell you, you know, I was hopeless at school, and you know they weren't. You know they were the SWAT. I was hopeless at school. And just to prove that, I brought one of my old reports there. And just a quick assessment: German, rather disappointing. Mathematics, fair. Chemistry, poor, much more effort required. Physics, rather weak. Physical education, only fair. position in class, 28th out of 34. You know, I was hopeless, basically, going nowhere. I remember my headmaster used to do an annual interview, and it was a thing to be feared because he was, his name was E.N. Holton. We used to call him Nobby Holton. He was a Dickensian sort of character. He was pencil thin, white as a sheet, small, rimless specs, black cloak, always carried a cane in his hand. And one day he called me in and said, "So, Stelling," he said, "you want to be a journalist, do you?" "Absolutely right, Mr. Holton. Yes, I do want to be a journalist." He said, "You enjoy prying into people's private lives, do you? You enjoy scurrilous gossip. You want to look behind people's curtains into their homes." And I thought, he's not seen the Hartlepool Mail. But nevertheless, it encouraged me. I mean, I was determined that was all I was going to do. And that's when I started my career at the Hartlepool Mail. And it was a fantastic grounding. You know, I know people look at, you know, the Great God television and things like that now, but if you get the chance to work for a local newspaper, you know, you grab their hand because it's the sort of place where, you know, I would do Crown Court, Magistrates Court, County Court. For a while, my aim was to be a court reporter, especially when you've been, you know, in the biggest courts, in the Crown Courts, doing murder trials and such like. It was absolutely fantastic. You know, you'd sit in on council meetings. You'd learn to ask questions. You'd learn to make contact. You'd go out and you'd meet the local police. You know, you'd meet the local landlord, which is often a lot more enjoyable than meeting the local police. You'd meet the local postmistress, anybody who might have a little story for you somewhere along the line. You'd nurture contacts. You'd learn to be a journalist. You'd learn to ask questions. It was a fantastic grounding. But I was lucky because in those days, as Mike would tell you, that we were in at the birth of local radio. And there were so many more opportunities now, than you'll find now out there. You'll find it a lot tougher. When I first joined Radio Tees, I had no broadcasting experience at all. Within the first week, I was presenting news bulletins live on air. We worked in a newsroom which had maybe 10 people at the time. It's not like that anymore. The numbers are vastly reduced. So I was fortunate in that sense. I was fortunate too in the quality of people that were involved then. Mark Mardell was in the newsroom then, who's now BBC News' Washington correspondent. There's a guy called John Andrew who went on to work for BBC TV News. He filled a whole range of jobs. Home Affairs correspondent was one of his jobs. We had Libby Forbert, David Stevenson, Kent Bark. I may not mean anything to you at the moment, but they all went on to work for the Radio 4 Today programme. Ruth Pitt, who became an award-winning documentary maker. Helen Bowden, who went on to be a high-powered person in the BBC, been in the news a lot recently, of course. So real quality of people there, which was absolutely fantastic. And as I say, you've got opportunities. My first opportunity was where I made my first step into sport. And it was a sort of bizarre situation. I'd been there for 2 weeks. And I tell you how long ago it was. I was playing football on a Saturday morning and I got a telegram. Telegrams existed in those days. And that telegram said, "Go to Welland Road immediately, report on Leeds v Middlesbrough," which was a top flight game in those days. And so I thought, oh, fantastic, I'll do that. I'm thinking, how will I do that? I haven't got a car. So I rang my then girlfriend and said, how about an afternoon shopping in Leeds? She had a car. And she didn't realise that she was doing the shopping and I was going to the football. But you get there, it's a steep learning curve because, you know, I was dropped off at Elland Road and I thought, great, how do I get in? You know, and they say they leave us a ticket, but all I could see were queues. I didn't know about press entrances and things like that. Eventually get into the ground, and in those days all communication was done by telephone. Where are the telephones? You know, things that you just don't know. So I relied on some old hacks at the Evening Gazette to help me out, and they were absolutely fantastic. And that was it. You know, that was 2 weeks into my radio career. I'd done my first football match in terms of reporting, and it was the first step, if you like, away from news towards sport. But I mentioned that, I was lucky in a lot of ways at the time. But there were other differences. In those days, regional accents were not in favour at all. I mean, nowadays it's a positive benefit, I think, in broadcasting to have an accent. But in those days it was very much, the BBC accent or nothing. And when I went to London eventually, I remember my boss at LBC IRN, then is a guy called Mike Lewis. And he showed me a letter he got one day from somebody saying, for goodness sake, where did you get this new sports presenter from? We can't understand a word that he says. And Mike Lewis wrote back defending me and said, I'm sure you would agree that in this day and age, regional accent should be encouraged. But our correspondent wrote back and was determined to have the final word, and he said, yeah, regional accents are to be encouraged, but speech defects should not. So, it wasn't always easy in those days. But the thing I found during my career, and no doubt you will during yours as well, is, a lot of you obviously moved to be in Leeds, to be on this course, but you move. You move where the work is, and eventually I got the opportunity to go to London. Having applied for a lot of jobs, I had an old friend who used to have a theory. He would apply for 100 jobs every week. And his theory was that if you stand in the middle of a motorway for long enough, then eventually something will hit you. And it did actually. What hit him was a TV game show called Game for a Laugh, and suddenly he found himself presenting a mainstream TV game show at 8 o'clock on a Sunday night, watched by about 14 million people. So it worked out well for him, and it worked out well for me in the end as well. And I went to LBC in the early 80s, in fact in 1981, which was the summer of the London riots. And I remember I'd given up this lovely home overlooking a golf course in Teesside with 2 toilets. I thought I'd made it, up and down toilets. And instead I was living in a rented flat with this will sound very familiar to a lot of you, I know. A rented flat with a shared kitchen, a shared toilet, a TV that ran by virtue of putting 50 pences in it every 15 minutes. And outside my window were coach loads of police in riot gear. And I spent the first couple of weeks in London squatting behind the door which led straight into my apartment with the only weapon I could find, which was a 3/4 full bottle of whiskey, ready to hit anybody over the head who came through that door. Well, it was 3/4 full at the start of the fortnight. It wasn't 3/4 full by the end of the fortnight. And I hated it. I absolutely hated it. But like a lot of things, you stick it out. And in the end, I went to the European Athletics Championships, the World Athletics Championships, the Los Angeles Olympics, and it was just a fantastic experience. And eventually, after the Los Angeles Olympics, I moved on again, and you need a lot of luck along the way. Mike Lewis, who was the guy who defended me to my critical correspondent in London at LBC, had got a job as the sports editor at the BBC. BBC Radio, well, it was Radio 2 in those days. It's Radio 5 these days that does all their sport, but in those days it was Radio 2. And he took me with him. And I was really fortunate then in the sense that I worked with some of the doyens of the sports broadcasting world. There were people with fantastic voices and fantastic experience, radio commentators like Peter Jones and Brian Butler, and for me, the doyen of them all, Des Lynam, who taught me that it doesn't matter how big you are and how good you are, doesn't stop you being nice. He was absolutely fantastic to me. I was a cub reporter, and Des treated me like he would treat anybody else. He was absolutely brilliant. He always had time for you. He always had some advice for you. And hopefully I learned a few lessons from him that you treat people the same regardless of what your position is. And it was a great experience. I mean, I went around the world, as Mike said. One of my best experiences there was going to the Seoul Olympic Games. And we had accreditation as radio reporters just for 2 of us to be in the Olympic Village at any one time. And there was really high security in those days because there were all sorts of terrorist threats. I mean, as there are now, but they came from different quarters. They were always terrified in South Korea that North Korea would do something to affect the Olympic Games. So security was really tight. which is why only two of us could get into the Olympic Village. And I remember getting a call at 4:30 in the morning in my bedroom one day saying, "Jeff, get into the Olympic Village right now, there's a big story breaking." And that big story was that Ben Johnson, who'd won the 100 metres, won the gold medal, had failed a drugs test. And that was a massive story at the time. And I was the first reporter into the Olympic Village and one of only two there. I managed to survive 3 or 4 hours in there. My colleague, who worked for local radio, was spotted by security staff pretty quickly and hauled away. And he was asked if anybody else was in there who worked for the media. And he said, "Oh yes, Jeff Stelling, you'll find him in such and such a room, such a..." Thanks, pal. But anyway, it was terrific. But at this stage, I mean, I had no ambitions at all to go into TV, none whatsoever. And really, it was only because the top job, if you like, came along then, which was, in radio terms, in sporting radio terms, presenting Sport on 2, which is now Sport on 5. And I thought I'd get this job, no problem. You know, I'd stood on it a few times, and I thought I'm sure to be the next presenter. And I went for an interview with Pat Ewing, who was the controller of sport, and I didn't get the job. I was gobsmacked, disappointed. You know, people will think I'm an egotist, but enough of them. I didn't get the top job. And I asked her why not, and she said, because somebody better has got it. And that somebody better was John Inverdale. And although it was hard to swallow at the time, as the years went on, I realised, actually, yeah, she was probably right, because John Inverdale is a fantastic broadcaster. And, you know, I'm sure you'll forgive me for saying it, but particularly his strength, his forte, is radio probably more than TV. And he has been absolutely wonderful over the years. And as I say, at that stage, I had considered my career to be in radio. And you look at some of the great broadcasters now, and I know a lot of you will look at TV, again, as being the ultimate goal. But you look at John Inverdale, you look at people like John Humphreys, you look at Peter Allen on 5 Live, fantastic broadcasters. It's a great place for a career. And I would have had no regrets whatsoever if my whole life had been spent in radio. But it didn't. After the disappointment of that, I had another stroke of luck in the sense that an old friend of mine was working at TVAM, which was, of course, the forerunner to GMTV, and he said, "Do you want to come and work for us? Come and do some television." So, go and do some television. Worst 18 months of my life, beyond all question. I mean, I was on screen less often than Roland Rat. And the worst thing was that it was, because I was involved in sport now, they gave absolutely no priority whatsoever to sport. None whatsoever. We worked on a 3-week rota, and this will sound like paradise to some people, but it was hell. The first week of the 3-week rota, we would be allowed to go out and shoot a VT. The maximum length of that could be 1.5 minutes. That was all they would run. 1.5 minutes was the maximum length. And bear in mind, it would go out at 6:30 on a Saturday morning as well. It wasn't exactly, you know, high-powered stuff. We'd have all week to prep it, to go and shoot it, to voice it. It was a ridiculous length of time. Some of them looked good, but they should have done. You know, they should have been award-winning because of the amount of time you had to do them. The next week on our rota, we would be on script writing duty. So we would script the sports bulletins for the following morning. So I would turn up there at 9 o'clock in the evening. We had a 2-minute sports bulletin to write, 180 words, and I had 12 hours to do it in. And the question was, did you write in the first half hour and be finished by 9:30 at night, or did you wait till 6 o'clock in the morning and then write it? You know, it was, the rest of the time you sat watching overnight TV, it was terrible. And the next week you were off. You know, so that wasn't the toughest of regimes. But if you want to be a broadcaster, you want to be a journalist, it was the least satisfying spell of my life. And when another TV company came along, a new TV company, you might remember the Squarial people, the old BSB, as they were then, British Satellite Broadcasting, came along and said, "Would you come and join us?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely, I'll come and join you." And I went there as a reporter initially, a sports reporter. They had 3 sports news presenters in mind, and I'd applied for one of those jobs, actually. Once again, didn't get it. But a couple of weeks before I was due to start, my boss called me in and said, "I've been looking back through your show reel, and you could have been wasted as a reporter. I want you as one of the main presenters." So I said, "Okay, which one of the 3 has dropped out?" And he said, Steve Scott's dropped out, which was fair enough. So I worked on that, you know, practicing my skills, if you like, in front of an audience, well, smaller than this one, that's for sure, along with Anna Walker and Gary Richardson. And it was a great place to practice with virtually nobody seeing you. But it came to a sticky end because, of course, eventually Sky came along and Sky swamped BSB. There was no room for everybody who was working there, me included. So I went off to be a freelance, which I guess a lot of you will end up doing. And it's a great way of life, frustrating way of life. You know, you've got to take the sort of jobs you don't want to take because you've got bills to pay and you've got mortgages to pay. And I did just that, work for Eurosport. Now, Eurosport at that time was based in Paris, which that was the big plus. The big downside was that it was a total shambles. Total shambles. I went out there to commentate on football. I ended up doing athletics, tennis, anything really. I remember one day, and there's a serious point to this, I came off doing an athletics commentary, and the French controller of programs came over to me and said, Jeff, he said, we need you to do some fencing. I said, fencing? Is it creosoting, is it? And he said, no. He said, you need to do some fencing for us. I said, can't do it, don't know anything about it. He said, you're the only Englishman left in the studio. You'll do it, you won't work for us again. So I sat down in front of a monitor. Everything was done via a monitor. Nothing was done live at the events at all. And I managed to do a half an hour's fencing commentary without mentioning the fencing once. In the sense that, you know, you read the titles. You welcome to, the first thing I knew was a world semi-final, world championship semi-final, you know, live from Prague. Goodness me. The next half hour consisted of, well, the crowd appreciated that, and oh my word, goodness me, and the winner is. And I wasn't alone in that. Some of you might remember Stato, Angus Loughran. This is a true story. He was working there at the same time, and exactly the same situation, but within a different sport occurred. He was told to do some ice hockey. And it was a big ice hockey match. Couldn't get any bigger. You know, it was, as it was then, the USSR, but Russia against America. Stato knew nobody. No team sheets, nothing at all. And I swear this happened somewhere in a dusty archive. You'll be able to dig this out. He decided to commentate using the names of the only Russians he knew. It's Gorbachev to Khrushchev. Gagarin. It was all the way through. He did half an hour's commentary using the names principally of Russian leaders and American leaders on the other side. Yeah. And I'm sure that exists somewhere, and one day somebody will discover it. But there is a serious side to it, because, you know, okay, I never did fencing again, but I went on to do things like sumo wrestling, commentate, by the way, not take part. NFL, which I knew absolutely nothing about. When I went to Sky, I would do darts, pool, snooker, greyhound racing, knew nothing about any of them initially. But whether you're going to be a sports reporter, you know, or a news reporter, I think the important thing is to pick something like that. You know, specialise in something. Everyone wants to do football. Everyone wants to do cricket. Everyone wants to do rugby. If you can find a niche that a lot of other people don't want to do, it'll help you get a foot in the door. You know, you may not be in demand often, but you can get the foot in the door. I mean, the NFL that I did, a guy rang me and said, what do you know about NFL? I said, nothing about NFL. He said, how much can you learn in 2 weeks? We've got a 13-week series of the World League of American Football coming on. I said, 2 weeks, you know, how much you pay me? I can learn it. And had 13 weeks doing that. So I think it's important to have a little specialist niche. I mean, I got a foot in the door at Sky Sports basically because of my knowledge of horse racing. It was never my ambition to do horse racing, you know, in terms of, I didn't see my life covering that, but I got a foot in the door through that, in the sense that they were setting up a horse racing program. They were looking for somebody with a bit of expertise who could point them in the right direction. That's all I did, really. And it meant that I got the chance to do other shows at Sky, including Sports Saturday, which was the forerunner to Soccer Saturday. And Soccer Saturday was a soccer show with no football in it. Sports Saturday was a sports show with no sport in it. We used to go out on Saturday afternoon, and because we had no rights to anything whatsoever, we would cover some of the most obscure things. Synchronized swimming in the studio, with no water. So we had a synchronized swimming team going through their routine in the studio. The day of the World Cup final, we had no rights to the World Cup final. So my co-presenter, Suzanne Dando, and I played Subutio live on TV. The producer was very upset because I kept kneeling on her players and breaking both of their legs. I should be taking it more seriously. Towards Christmas, and I don't know how we got away with it with all the rules and regulations these days, Harrods used to send us along a load of innovative toys that they wanted to have on display. I remember one Christmas I was wearing a Velcro hat while Alan Lamb was throwing balls at my head. And even though I wasn't sure that, I was heading in the right direction, I was determined to stick it out, because hopefully I was learning a lot about television, a lot of hours on screen. And then Soccer Saturday came along and, my life changed really. But I was aware that I'd got an opportunity and I thought this was a show that could work. It had been just about the first show that I'd been involved in I thought could work. So I was determined to sort of try and grasp the nettle, if you like. And if you look at the show now, it lasts for 6 hours, but I would guess that probably per show, I would put in something like 20 hours of preparation on stats and the such like. So that I know when Saturday comes, for instance, I'm not picking on Leeds, but I tell you, they got 1 point from the last 7 away games. Or that Motherwell haven't scored a penalty in the SPL all season. They've had 3, but haven't scored any of them. Or Wilfred Zaha's scored once in his last 25 games. Or that Norwich City have won 9 times at home this season. They've all been by the odd goal. Boring as hell to some people. But nevertheless, that's the sort of work that I put in to try and make sure that, I take advantage of the opportunities. You've got to live it. You've got to keep ahead of the opposition, if you like. And again, if you look at opportunities, and I know a lot of you will be, knocking on doors, continuously and trying to get jobs and the such like. And I mentioned, if you stand in the middle of the motorway for long enough, I think you've got to make yourself stand out. So, I'm lucky enough to do Champions League as well now. So we did Real Madrid against Manchester United live in the Bernabeu a couple of weeks ago. The guy who was my producer that day started off by coming into the studios as a 15-year-old, working on Saturdays and Sundays without being paid. It was tough. It was hard work, and nobody took into consideration the fact he wasn't being paid. He was asked to do the same and the same amount of work as absolutely anybody else. But that dedication, that willingness to make himself stand out from everybody else, means that he is now the producer of the Champions League. Gets to go to glorious venues around the world, a real high-powered job, and he's 32, so he's got many, many years. Will probably go on to be a, top television producer stroke executive, because he had that sort of commitment. It hasn't always been plain sailing, by the way, since then. There have been some ups and downs for me, in the sense that live television can be a dangerous place, as a lot of people have found out. And I remember swearing live on screen once, which was not recommended. It was in the middle of a Soccer Saturday, and my team, Hartlepool, were away to Barnet. And I tell you how long ago this was. We were unbeaten in 21 games. And I'd spent the evening before with the football team, as it happens, and they said to me, and Barnet had been the last team to beat us. They beat us on our ground. And they said, oh, Barnet, shocking team, terrible team, how did they beat us? So I went into that day very confident indeed. And they were about to, well, I'll tell you about, there were 81 minutes of the game gone, when I could hear in the background saying, goal at Barnet, Barnet 1, Hartlepool 0. And the idea was that I would throw at the reporter at the ground, and you've seen the thing, a little mug shot of him will come up and cover up me. So I threw to him, so there's been a goal at Underhill, Barnet against Hartlepool. Let's hear about it from Charlie Farnes-Barnes, expecting the picture of Charlie Farnes-Barnes to come up, and under my breath, I said, shit. No Charlie Farnes-Barnes. Just me saying shit live on TV. I was called into my boss's office on the Monday to explain myself. And I said, well, I was born at 1 Hartlepool 0, you know. And he said, fair enough. He said, I'm surprised it wasn't something worse than shit. I got in a more serious mess in truth a little later on. And the scenario surrounding that was that there was a lot of controversy about whether people within football were taking bungs, you know, to help accommodate transfers, if you like. And Panorama ran a whole show one evening on bungs in football. And one of the figures at the head of that was Sam Allardyce, who was the then Bolton Wanderers manager. A couple of days later, we were covering Bolton live down at Portsmouth. And after the game, Bolton had won the game. After the game, we had a two-way live with Sam. Sam was down in the dressing room area and I was up in the studio. And we had been told by the press office that we weren't to ask any questions about the Panorama programme and bungs. But, you know, my view of press officers, you will find out this out as you go along, I'm sure. Some of you might end up working for them. The press officer's role within Premier League football doesn't appear to be to ease communications between football clubs and the media. It is to prevent communications between football clubs and the media. And I didn't want to have them telling me that I wasn't going to ask questions about bungs. It was a topical subject. We had Big Sam live, and I said to Big Sam 2 or 3 questions in, so Sam, have you ever been offered a bung? And Sam went puce. By the way, it's a yes-no question, and I know a lot of the time we'll be told not to ask yes-no questions, but I don't necessarily agree with that. You ask a yes-no question, there's nowhere to hide sometimes. You know, it's a straightforward answer, have you or haven't you? I think that Sam misinterpreted it. There wasn't meant to be any implication of guilt, if you like, in the question. It was, have you ever been offered a bung? I think Sam heard it as, have you ever taken a bung? Anyway, suffice to say, there was a deafening silence in the scanner in the control truck. And then I heard somebody say, shit, why did he ask that? And we had about 15 minutes of the show to go, and it was a difficult 15 minutes. The second I got off, my producer came on talkback to me and said, don't come down past the dressing room area. Sam and the Bolton chairman are waiting for you. So I ended up sneaking out of Fratton Park that night via a back entrance and into my car. And when I listened to the 10:30 sports bulletin on the BBC, I was all over it. And I thought, I'm in trouble here. And then 5 Live rang me and said, we're having a debate tomorrow morning on the Victoria Derbyshire show about the question you asked Sam Allardyce. Would you be willing to come on as a guest? No, I would not. You know, and I was concerned. It was a legitimate journalistic question. There was no doubt in my mind about that, but I knew, you know, that there were a lot of sensitivities involved. And as far as Sky are concerned, obviously a lot of money involved as well in terms of contracts and so on and so forth. And I rang my boss up at 11 o'clock that night, and he said, what the hell have you done? He'd been told already by the Bolton Wanderers contingent what happened and so on and so forth. And he was absolutely livid, and I thought, this is it. This is the end of my career. I'm going to lose my job here. And I was called into the office the next day. It was all of the back pages, by the way. Back page story, back page lead on every newspaper. And every journalist was supportive of me. Every single one said, that's the question that we wanted to ask him, but didn't. Every football manager was not supportive of me, but it's somewhere. But I was called into the office and I thought, that's it. And I was, you know, not quite an outcast for a little while after that, but I was certainly on the fringes. It was made clear to me that in future, you know, I should play ball, if you like, and not ask the difficult questions. But I've never really accepted that. Because I've always wanted to be a journalist, yeah, most of my life is spent asking soft questions, having a bit of banter, you know, with the guys I work with. But because I want to be a journalist, if the opportunity arises, I always want to ask the tough question, or the right question, not necessarily the tough question. I did on that occasion, and you know, I almost paid dearly. But I would advise you, if you go on, you know, Don't listen to them. Ask the right question. Ask what you know is the right question. Don't expect journalism necessarily to make you popular. You know, when I first started, it was seen as a noble profession, and of course it isn't necessarily now. But I look at football and think, you know, for every Joey Barton, there's, you know, a David Beckham. For every rogue trader in banking, there are 10,000 good traders. You know, for every bent copper, there are, I don't know, 20,000 good ones and such like. And, you know, for every journalist who besmirches the profession, there are tens of thousands of them who honour the profession. But as I say, it won't necessarily always make you popular. Look, I've had loads of letters over the years, and I brought one of them, just one of them today, to show how you can't please all the people all the time, regardless. And this comes from, well, actually, it's written on the back of his telephone bill. And just to set the scene, I used to write a column in the Sun. It wasn't exactly a hard-hitting column. It was predicting the results of that weekend's football matches. That was all it was, okay? Nothing more than that. So one Saturday morning, I arrived into the studio. That was the morning my column went out as well, by the way. And I've got this letter. And it says, "Dear Jeff Stelling, Big Neil Sullivan" here on the pen. But this does not sound promising. "Listen here, you podgy, grinning, stupid, slimy, big-headed and old codger, you clueless so-and-so of a man. You stupid Stelling with the worst possible Saturday football predictions. You always get most of them wrong. You are a joke, Stelling. I support Fulham. You always slag them. You always predict them to lose. Stelling says Liverpool 2, Fulham 0, you. If you slag Fulham off once more, I'm going to smash your face. We would not even notice, you podgy. If you predict next time I read in the Sun that it's Fulham 3, Villa 0, that'll be okay. Or else." Big Neil Sullivan. Grabbed the copy of that morning's paper. Fulham against Aston Villa. Fulham 0, Villa 1. Oh my goodness, what have I done? See, look, you're not going to be able to please people all the time. But it's a fantastic way of life. It's opened so many doors to me, as Mike said, you know, I've been lucky enough to go on to branch out, to do different things. I mean, to be here today for a start, to be asked to do something like this, which is absolutely fantastic. To go and host a game show, Countdown, which was absolutely brilliant fun. And Rachel Riley is as gorgeous in the flesh as she's on TV as well. And I know that's a sexist thing to say, but I mean, it's so unfair, isn't it? I mean, she's brilliant and beautiful, you know? And I'm not brilliant or beautiful, but nevertheless, we shared the same TV screen for 3 years or so. I know people over the years, they'll try and put you off. They'll say, look, it's hard to get into. It's impossible to get into journalism in this day and age, but nothing's impossible. And, you know, hopefully my story shows that absolutely nothing is impossible. And people will say to you as well, you read the reports about bad journalism, about journalists who do besmirch the profession. But my 14-year-old son, he wants to be a journalist. And I said, son, go and do it. It's the best thing you can do in your life. And that's what I would say to all of you guys as well. No matter how hard it seems. And if you get a TV job, they'll pay you a pittance. And you'll be working till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and you will be getting the tea, and you'll hate it. Stick it out, because in the end, it's just a fantastic life. If you've got any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. And if you haven't, we'll all go have a cup of coffee. It doesn't have to be about football, whatever, you know, journalism, football, anything. Yeah.
Soccer Saturday is 6 hours long.
Yeah.
And the ad breaks are quite short. Do you ever get time to go to the toilet?
You'll find that at about 10 to 3, there's always a VT that runs that's at least 3 minutes long. And that's just about time. The loo is about 100 yards away, so it's just about time to get there, get back in the seat, get the earpiece in, and get the mic on. Although there have been once or twice when I've forgotten to put the earpiece in, and I've thought, I've gone deaf. I can't hear the director which sometimes is a good thing, you know, because she's got a wicked tongue on her. But no, yeah, you've got to time things like that. So don't drink too much coffee. That's the other thing. Yeah.
I'm currently doing a research project on gender sport and sport. I want to ask you whether you believe London 2012 has or will have a lasting impact on female sport.
Well, it's a good question. I'm not sure. You'd have liked to think so, wouldn't you? But in the same way, you'd have liked to have thought the Paralympics would have a lasting effect on sports coverage. But since then, I haven't noticed much coverage of Paralympic sport in the national press, and I haven't noticed any more coverage of women's sport, or not much more coverage of women's sport, you know, in the national media. The BBC have been doing, you know, have covered women's test matches, which they would never have done in the past, which is obviously a fantastic thing. I think it'll be a long job, very long job, and I don't just think that, you know, the 2012 Olympics, fantastic as they were, in itself will kickstart more coverage of women's sport. I think it'll need to be a prolonged campaign to ensure that happens. You know, and obviously hope it does. You know, we all know women's sport is just as good to watch. You know, you look at women's tennis, just as good to watch. In fact, for years it's been better to watch than a lot of the men's tennis, which is, you know, biff bosh. Whereas women's tennis had a different set of values, maybe not so much now, but did have a different set of values than the likes of Martina Hingis were playing and such like. It was fantastic to watch, and consequently would get audiences every bit as good as the male game. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you got any kind of, you know, what is the kind of key piece of advice you'd offer to journalists who want to kind of succeed going forward?
Well, I mean, advice is, you know, the first thing, you do need to be lucky, you know. I mean, I've had so many strokes of luck along the years. It's been, when I first went to London, to LBC IRN, I turned them down a year before. They offered me the job, turned them down. The guy who took the job decided it wasn't for him. So a year later, they rang me and said, look, it's a year on, have you changed your mind? I said, yeah, okay, I'll come this time. My boss there, going to the BBC, you know, took me with him. Really, really lucky. When I went into television, when I went to the Squarial people, Steve Scott, who's a, you know, good broadcaster, decided that he didn't want to do the sports news presenting, so it fell into my lap. So that's not advice, but you need to be lucky first of all. I just think the key thing in everything, and it doesn't matter whether you're a sports presenter, a news presenter, you know, is preparation. Preparation, preparation, preparation. There were a lot of stories that I used to go and do my prep in Winchester services off the M3, and it was true. On Thursdays, my kids were very young, they were all preschool age, and they couldn't understand that on Thursdays I needed to lock myself away and do 10 or 12 hours of preparation, you know, going through every website I could find, going through every statistical site I could find, reading every newspaper. So I would pack my bags and I would go and sit in Winchester services, normally from 10 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock in the evening, because the preparation had to be right. And I think that's the biggest thing, really, in whatever form of life you work in, but certainly in journalism, is make sure you know your facts, don't get them wrong, and the only way you can do that is by preparing. And the facts I've got on a Saturday afternoon now, 99% of them will never get used, never get used. But the 1% that do get used have to be right. And that's why I spend, you know, 3 times as long preparing as you actually do in presenting the programme. Yeah?
You said that regional accents could be an advantage. Do you think that with Colin Murray being replaced on Match of the Day 2, a regional accent could be too regional?
Yeah, I mean, I see there's an element of that. I'm not sure that that was down to, you know, Colin's accent. I think Colin was just... No, I know Colin, and he's a top guy, and he's really good fun. And but he wants to do it differently. He wants to you know, have a different slant on football. And I enjoyed the way he presented Match of the Day too, to be honest. I don't think it was just down to accents, but I mean, the simple fact that he got there, you know, he's presenting national radio, national TV, you know, with you know, yeah, regional accent. And there are lots of people around like that now. You know, in the end, it didn't hold me back. It hasn't held him back. And I don't think, you know, there are a lot of our great broadcasters, you know, are Scottish, and there's some great Scottish accents out there as well. So nothing to be ashamed of having a regional accent these days, and I certainly don't think it holds you back. Yeah. Hi, yeah.
Hi, I've got an interest in sports journalism, and I just wondered, because Sky obviously hasn't come about its controversies in the past, whether you think it's getting harder or easier for women to get into sort of broadcast sports journalism?
Well, it's easier now than it was in my day. There were no women in sports broadcasting then. No women at all. And nowadays you look and there are lots. I mean, I was listening to Eleanor Allroyd on 5 Live coming up today. Actually, she was co-hosting the breakfast show on 5 Live. Gabby Logan, who's done fantastically, and you know, Mike kindly said, you know, for 5 years in a row I was the sports journalist of the year. The SGA voted me sports journalist of the year. I'm pretty sure that it'll be Claire Balding this year. You know, because she's an absolutely fantastic year. There used to be a terrible bias against women in sports broadcasting on the basis that virtually all the sport that was shown on TV, broadcast on radio, was male sport. And if you hadn't played the game, how on earth could you know what you were talking about? That was the theory. You know, well, I've never played football, and the boys on my panel on a Saturday afternoon will frequently point out and say, "You've never played the game, what do you know?" And I always like to say just as much as you do, as it happens, Phil, or Charlie. You know, so I think attitudes have changed in that sense now. You know, you don't have to have played the game. There is much more acceptance of you know, women broadcasters, you know, right throughout the industry. In some senses, it is harder to get in because of the, you know, what I said before, there just aren't as many opportunities as there were when I started out. But in a contradictory way, there are more opportunities for women than there were then, you know. But it's still tough, but you've got a better chance now than you would have done a few years ago, yeah. Yeah, sorry.
We've had a question on Twitter
that's
come in from a guy called Eddie Prince, who describes himself as a graduated journalist living in Leeds. And he wants to know, how does Sky Sports regard the look of their presenters? He says that BBC presenters seem less glam. How important is...
Well, glamorous, obviously. That's what they look for, you know. Well, I think probably he's not referring to Soccer Saturday. You know, when I think of Phil Thompson, goodness me. I co-hosted an event with Phil one day, and I thought I was going to be late when I saw his nose pressed up against the window. And I realised he was still 5 minutes away. sorry, it's a really cheap gag, but no, he's obviously really referring to Sky Sports News in a lot of respects, I would imagine, by that. And yet there is an element of, you know, people need to look the part. I mean, certainly from the women's point of view there, you know, as you'll see, most of the women on Sky Sports News are very attractive. Doesn't necessarily make it right. In my view, you know, people should be there for what they know, not how they look. But unfortunately, I don't appoint people there, so. Yeah.
I also like working on Countdown, because there you're a presenter and you're there to entertain rather than Soccer Saturday where you're a talker.
Yeah. Well, actually, in a way, I mean, I was there to entertain, and I was, but in a lot of respects, you know, all you're there to do at Countdown really is just prompt things along in the right direction. You know, because it's such an institution, it's been going for so long. I mean, the star of Countdown is the game itself, and it's the simplest thing in the world, you know. It's the only game show, if you like, where absolutely everybody plays along at home. If you watch it, you don't just sit and watch it, you play along, you try and beat the score, you know. And I mean, the great thing for me was that Rachel would do the maths, Susie Dent would do the dictionary, the contestants would provide the answer. All I did was press the button to start the clock. You know, that was pretty much it, you know. Say hello and goodbye and make sure we got on the air okay and off the air on time. It was different for me. It was something I wanted to do. It was a different challenge. I did it for 3 years, never saw my life as being a game show host, still don't.
Did you take any advice from Des? Because he did it as well.
Des did it as well, yeah. No, I didn't. The one piece of advice that Des gave me was don't do it. He did it for 18 months, and he said by the end of it, we used to record 5 shows a day, You know, you'd start at 9 o'clock in the morning and finish at 9 o'clock in the evening, and you do it 3 days in a row, so you do 15, a batch of 15 shows. And Des said by the 14th or the 15th, he just wanted to hit the contestants. Because it was, you know, it was pretty high pressure stuff, just in the sense of the hours that you spent. You'd finish one show, straight in your dressing room, change it in different shirt and tie, you know, different set of contestants, try and learn a little bit about them and the such like. And it was absolutely non-stop. And that's why, you know, Des O'Connor, Des Lyon and myself, none of us have lasted particularly long. You know, I'll be able to see how long Nick Hewer lasts. I think it's his second year now as well. But it's tough, you know. I mean, goodness knows how Richard Whiteley did it for so many years. Yeah, right at the back.
With the recent Oscar Pistorius scandal, what are your views on it?
Yeah. Never prejudge anything. That's, you know, yeah. I tell you what, one thing is interesting though, isn't it, is the coverage has been absolutely staggering. You know, when you listen to the bail hearing, the amount of evidence that's meant to be provided there, if you go to a remand hearing in, you know, Crown Court in this country, absolutely nothing comes out apart from name, address, charge and appeal. A plea rather. But there, the amount of information that comes out is absolutely staggering. You know, it's like the trial itself. But is he guilty? I've got no idea. Yeah. Yes?
You're right about there being more women in broadcasting doing sport. But looking at the press, it doesn't seem to have changed a lot over the years. And I'm just wondering if you've got any suggestions, particularly as we're in education, how we can encourage more women to come into sports reporting, and if, in your opinion, women are as interested in sport as men?
Well, are women as interested in sport as men? Yeah, I think what you've got to do now is take the sport that I'm involved with, football. You go to any football match, a huge percentage of the crowd nowadays are women. And it is, yeah, I look at the written press. I mean, the Daily Mail's got a lady called Laura Williamson who covers football for them. Who does a fantastic job. There are women within the written form of the media, there's no doubt. But I mean, I'm a bit detached from it now, so I'm not sure why it's so hard for them to get in. But again, I honestly think that it's a case of finding a niche. You know, we talk about women's sport getting more coverage in this day and age, and hopefully that will go on. You don't want to pigeonhole people, but inevitably, you know, initially, a lot of people who will cover women's sport will be women, and I think it's like anything else. It's a foot in the door, isn't it? You know, once you've got your foot in the door, covering, I don't know, if you're covering women's cricket, whatever, you're there, you're in the building, you're talking to the editor and the sports editor and the such like, and when the football job or the rugby job or the cricket job comes along, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do it just as well. But it's like everything else, it's getting that first foot in the door, isn't it? That's the difficult part of it. Yeah, hi.
Is Cammy really as mad as a box of frogs?
Unbelievable Cammy. Yeah, I mean, he is. He is absolutely. He's just as you see him, really. I mean, he's a classic case of. If you look at all the football pundits around the country, from the BBC, the Alan Hansons and the Mark Lawrensons, and ITV with Roy Keane and Gareth Southgate, and our boys on Saturday afternoon, the Phil Thompsons, and mentioned George Best, and they've all been great footballers, and Cammy wasn't. But he's carved a niche for himself by being different, if you like, yet again. There's only Cammy who can say, Jeff, it's 1-1 at half-time, but it could easily be the other way around. Or the ball's just crept either side of the post. He is... or there's a classic case which got over 1 million hits on YouTube where it said, Cammy, there's been a red card at Portsmouth. Yeah. Has there, Jeff? I said, well, our information tells us there's been a red card. I said, count the Portsmouth players and see how many there are, Cammy. Get your gloves off and count the Portsmouth players. And he said, well, I haven't seen anything, Jeff. He said, well, it says here that Anthony Van den Boer of Portsmouth has been sent off. He said, I saw him going off, but I thought he was substituted. Yeah, but when we talk about women getting jobs in sport, in a way it's been the same for Cami. It's carving out a niche, doing something a little bit different. Now, I'm not sure that that's what he intended to do, you know, or whether it's just happened. A lot of Cami's humour is completely unintentional. But he has become, you know, a bit of a legend in sports broadcasting, you know, and of course in the world of TV commercials with his Ladbrokes ads. Yeah, hi.
With the popularity of Sky Sports News, do you think there'd be room for a show like Grandstand to come back on terrestrial TV?
No, it'd be up against Soccer Saturday, so definitely not. Well, Grandstand was, you know, the problem with Grandstand was, as far as the BBC were concerned, is that they ran out of rights to decent, you know, audience-pulling sports. In its heyday, you know, you'd have the BBC had an absolute monopoly of the top sporting rights. So Grandstand was the showcase for some fantastic sporting events. But as time has gone on, obviously, you know, their grip on sporting rights has been considerably weakened, and they just couldn't sustain it anymore. You know, they would see that, you know, there'd be an international rugby match on Sky at the same time. You know, and it's cutthroat business out there, in the sense of, if Sky or the BBC have got a decent sporting event, we will put something bang up against it, you know, to try and take away some of their audience, and they'll do exactly the same to us. I'm not sure anymore whether there's, you know, quite room for a Grandstand anymore. I think that the rights are so spread out. You know, we're going to have BT involved as well now. So I think you know, in a way, although it's a football show, Soccer Saturday is the nearest thing to it.
As a follow-up to that, do you think the fact that the BBC is publicly funded holds it back in respect?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, they have to be able to justify spending vast amounts of money, you know, and it's very hard to justify spending huge amounts of license payers' money on things like the football rights, and football is so expensive these days. You know, and I love football, a lot of you will, but a lot of people who pay their license fee will resent hugely funding millionaire footballers' lifestyles by virtue of, you know, TV rights paid for by their TV license fee. So yeah, they are, you know, they are definitely held back by that. And I'm not sure there will ever be the day again when the BBC, well, it certainly won't be the dominant force in sport again. It simply can't be, because of its responsibilities to the license payer, which is, in many respects, a shame. You know, I mean, obviously I'm delighted that Sky have got so many rights and such like, but I used to work for the BBC. It's a fantastic organisation, whatever you read about, you know, it's a fantastic organisation, and over the years it has covered sport magnificently, absolutely magnificently. You know, so I hope it's not the end of sport on the BBC, but I don't see them being, you know, the major players on that scene anymore. Yeah, hi.
Do you think all national sports should be available to everybody in the country, as in like national, like cricket's on Sky now?
Well, the argument for that would be, you know, when the BBC had the cricket rights, for instance, to test matches in Australia, you would see half an hour's play at 11:30 at night of recorded highlights. They had the opportunity to do it and didn't on those occasions. The biggest problem is that the likes of the BBC or any national broadcaster, they don't have the platform to do it. They can't just put a test match, you know, on BBC One or BBC Two all day long anymore, you know, because they have an obligation to people who are not involved in sport. Again, the licence payers and such like. Sky Sports know that, BT when they come along and the such like. You know, we've got so many different platforms that it can go on. We can, you know, in a football match, you'll see the difference in, for instance, Sky's Champions League coverage to the terrestrial Champions League coverage. We'll come on the air at 6 o'clock and go over at 11 because we can do it. You know, we can give it the big build-up. We can look at the after. Terrestrial channels will come on maybe 15 minutes beforehand, you know, because, you know, they need to show Coronation Street before it or whatever, you know. And I'm a Coronation Street fan, by the way, so, you know, and they need to be off in time for the news at 10. And we don't have those restraints. So while it's frustrating, because I understand that a lot of people can't afford subscription television, it's really, really frustrating for them. You know, a number of the main events are still only available on national terrestrial TV, and Sky are not allowed to bid for them. And I think that while that sort of status quo is preserved, that's probably okay.
And do you see yourself staying in sports journalism forever, or do you have other ambitions?
I've been in it forever. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, look, I had my little dabbles as a game show host. As I say, initially, I didn't want to be a sports journalist. I just wanted to be a journalist. It's just the way that things have panned out. You know, I got the best of both worlds. Got to be a journalist, loved sport, and ended up being a sports journalist. And, you know, people will say, "Oh, I'm a TV presenter," but it still says journalist on my passport. And it's always how I still regard myself as a journalist. Yeah, I don't see myself doing anything else, not till I'm pensioned off by Sky, you know, probably in the not too distant future, I would think. But, you know. Yeah, hi.
And do you like watching yourself back?
No. No. I mean, look, you know, I never ever watch myself back. Never ever watch myself back. Maybe I should do sometimes. You know, you pick up some bad habits. And my worst habit, there was no question about it, but because I never watched myself back, I never realised, was that a lot of people, when they need thinking time on TV, they'll or you know, I close my eyes. Yeah, so frequently you see me on television, I'm going, I'm not asleep. You know, that's the audience. I'm not asleep. But it's an unconscious, you know, reaction, and it's just while I'm thinking. So I've tried to stop that. But other than that, no. Hate watching myself back. And most of the guys I knew, I mean, used to get a lot of advice from Des Lynam, and you know, Des would never watch himself back. It's live TV. It's gone. There's nothing you can do about it. Okay, maybe you can change your next performance a little bit, but it's there and gone, really. Hiya. Yeah.
You've still got that James Brown dancing figure.
James Brown dancing doll. I feel good. No, I mean the problem was that James Brown didn't make me feel good often enough. I think, you know, he only scored once in his last season, and Hartlepool let him go to Gateshead at the end of last season. So it was auctioned for the Mayor's charity in Hartlepool. So. And he raised a couple of £1,000, so that was a good thing. And in fact, I'm back in Hartlepool on Wednesday night, and the guy who bought it then has put it back in to be raffled for charity on Wednesday night. So, you know, he's going to do some good. He's a bit battered, actually, you know, because his right arm is hanging off like that, and his left leg is hanging off like that. Very much like the player himself, in actual fact. Yeah, hiya.
Do you agree that minority sports such as darts and rugby league wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the investment of Sky Sports?
I think they'd exist, but they might not exist in the form that they do now. I mean, you know, darts has been an absolute revelation for Sky. I did the first ever Sky darts coverage when the PDC, with the Eric Bristows of this world, as it was then, broke away from the other darts organisation. And the PDC, they were very suspicious of us, actually. And I remember the first day that we did it, we were at the Circus Tavern in Purfleet. That was where the World Champions took place. It was one of these lovely nightclubs where you walk along, you had to pull your feet off the floor because the carpets are soaked in booze and such like. But the important thing was, we had to earn their trust, and we were going to have a big start. And the idea was I was going to be behind the scenes talking to two darts legends who were Eric Bristow and Jockey Wilson. And I came on and introduced the show and said, you know, welcome to Purfleet, live darts on Sky. We're going to be the home of darts, first ever World PDC Championship. With me, two legends of the game. I've got Eric Bristow and Jockey Brown. Jockey Brown! You know, and they never let me forget it. So 15 years later, I was doing darts, and they didn't let me forget it. But in those days, and this is a true story as well, actually, there were no queues to get into the World Championships. We did a tournament in Salford, the home of the rugby club, as it was then, the Willows. One day, we started there were 3 people in the audience. 3 people. And one of the cameramen had an idea. It was just a bit of fun, actually. He got some pieces of paper, folded them all together, and did you see these cut-out sort of figures that you make, and you pull them apart, and it looks like people? He did that, and he put it in front of the camera, and it looked like a row of silhouetted heads. We used that shot to pretend there was a crowd there, and there wasn't. It was paper cut-out heads that we were showing. But nowadays, you're right, nowadays, You can't get into the World Championships. It's absolutely, sold out weeks and weeks in advance. And again, it's because Sky can give it wall-to-wall coverage. Yeah, okay, they gave it a bit of a makeover as well. They made it more glitzy. People came on to anthems, there were girls walking the players onto the stage and things like that. Explosions at the end, bigger prize money, and the such like. So, yeah, it certainly helped create the sport as it is right now. Rugby league, I'm not so sure, because rugby league's always had a firm following, hasn't it? And I think rugby league would have flourished anyway.
As a follow-up to that, how influential do you think figures like Sid Woodell have been in the promotion of darts?
He was the only commentator I know who was a bigger star than the players who were playing the sport. He was an incredible character, wordsmith, came out with phrases, we all know the great Sid Woodellisms, that were incomparable, and I just feel, nobody else could ever match him. The players treated him with complete respect because they knew how important he was in selling the game, and he was an integral part of, darts' growth into what it is now. Okay, they needed the people to be hitting the 180s, at the hockey, but they needed Sid the wordsmith as well to be describing it in the way that only he could. He was absolutely fantastic, and he was very important to the sport.
Sorry, the countdown clock has ticked down and has reached the end. Someone in entertainment once said you should always leave them wanting more. I think you've certainly done that. Jeff Stelling.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Not sure how insightful it was, but great. Thanks.
Stay in your seats because the sports theme continues. We're about to hear from Stuart Rosen from BBC Sport Interactive. So the entertainment continues. Don't move.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay.